Oh, that's cool. All right. Hello, everybody. Today, we're fortunate enough to have an interview with Jennings Zabrinsky, the author of Troupe of Shadows. There he is down there, a lovely human being. First and foremost, thank you and congratulations on writing such a wonderful story. I think when it
Yeah.
comes to fantasy, there's so much that goes on and it's such a big space. But I think what stood out for me first and foremost was just it might have been the only book I've ever read that had very easy to follow action scenes. And for a book where action and, like you said, the word blade takes such a big precedent, it was really cool to see that was the case, that it was easy to follow, that I didn't feel lost at any point throughout the story.
Well, thank you. That's a very nice compliment.
So start us off, Jennings, with the story of how this book came to be, because we get a lot of great trivia from our authors, and I always love discovering these little hidden stories behind them, and I know that you've got a good one behind this. So tell us how this book came into existence.
Yeah, so I used to hang out on like a writing Discord called I still am there. I'm not super active anymore, but called Book Done. And one of the other regulars on there had like a very small press indie thing that they hosted. They called it the Publishing Derby, where like yearly they'd kind of have like 100 pre-made covers that were all done with like a little bit of stock art and typography, very like cheaply made. And if you signed up for the Publishing Derby, you'd get one of these covers sort of like semi-randomly assigned. And it came with the title and the pen name already selected for you because it was meant to be anonymous. So I just took part in that because I hadn't really tried. Worked on I had like 1.5 like manuscripts that I'd written for like TradPub stuff and not really actually got to the point of submitting them. So I thought I'll just try this because it's like 4 months or whatever. And the some of the hard parts like that you might not necessarily know how to do if you've never done it before, like um, getting a cover together and actually figuring out how to publish the thing. It was kind of like part of that was already done. And yeah, I just the cover that we have like on the book at the moment is this pretty much the same cover, hasn't changed much. And that was the main inspiration for the story. I kind of just saw it and was like, ah, that gives me vibes of like the character designs are obviously very kind of like samurai ninja type things. But then I guess mainly because it was orange, I was like, that looks like a desert, so maybe it could be a Western. And then it was like that kind of fits together because Westerns mainly ripped off samurai movies and well, not mainly, but there's a lot of like cross influence there, and then there's things that deliberately emerge of both. Yeah, and yeah, all this was during COVID lockdown as well, so I didn't have much else to do. So I kind of went a bit hard. Yeah, I think I read it quite quickly and then rushed it out to like I was desperately just trying to find beta readers for it. So I ended up having to, especially because I had to remain anonymous. I couldn't talk to any of my like writing friends, so I had to go on like Reddit and be like, I'll swap beta reads for literally anybody. And ended up having to do like like 3 or 4 beta reads like in exchange like at the same time, which was tricky. But yeah, and then had to cram all that feedback in. But yeah, I kind of managed to get it out eventually, and that's the book it is.
So then, was it really? So it sounds like it was the case of matching a story to fit the cover.
That's how it started. I think it's like the inspiration was the cover and the title, and a little bit of the name, I think, because I obviously Jennings Zabrinsky is not my real name, but it's I don't know, it had a certain like kind of quirkiness to it that I thought like if this the this image of this person I've just generated in my head would write it a certain way. Like it would maybe have like a little bit of weirdness, a little bit of an edge to it. That I guess is part of me, but it's I guess more exaggerated through that like persona I kind of that popped into my mind while I was thinking about it. And some
That's
things are
really
just like
interesting. Yeah,
yeah.
that's cool.
And then there's
Do you think
things
there's
like
a distance between you and the story when you're under a pen name that lets you go a bit weirder or a bit wilder with it?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's I would yeah, I would say there is a certain amount of distance to it, but um I guess maybe that slipped away now that it's actually like out in the world and I'm having to um
Yeah,
stand by what I've written a bit more, you know. And like lots of my like real life friends and family know I've written this book, and so now I am a bit more like conscious of like, well, okay, it is kind of like me.
so like Jennings Zabrinsky also came into existence, and now you have to inhabit that persona sometimes. I guess that's that's a strange one.
Yeah, I mean, it's yeah, it's not so. Jennings Zabrinsky isn't so well known that there is like a persona, but I guess it was just like the um yeah, I think the name sort of maybe influenced the style a little bit, whereas if it was like more of a classic fantasy name like George R.R.
Yeah, Martin.
Yeah, something like that, something with two R's in the middle.
Initials. Yeah,
Yeah, or like yeah, or like my real which I won't mention, but my real name has a very different flavor, so I'd have maybe
yeah.
yeah.
Oh, that's cool, man. So, in the process of writing it, like when I read it, I was really impressed by the opening. For anyone that knows about the first chapter, reads that I do. I read the first chapter and immediately put it on the list of books to be read. But so, from my understanding, obviously you've written some well, like a manuscript and a half before, but for a first published book, this was really impressive, especially getting the opening right and getting action so right. So was that always how the story opened, or did you switch things about based on feedback from beta readers, or was that always how you saw the story opening?
That's a good question, and I can't 100% remember, but I think it did start with that perspective, because I thought I'm going, I'm having characters that aren't human, and the frame of reference isn't necessarily super grounded, so there's going to be at least one human point of view character to kind of uh, give the readers like a bit of a better frame of reference, I suppose. So
Yeah,
I knew I wanted it to have the human character who is like amongst the rest of this group, and also I knew I wanted to start with them. And yeah, I think mainly the things that changed were like small details about how that scene was set up physically. I think initially there was like, I don't know, I think they're all mounted and that sort of thing. And I can't remember if it had like a ravine kind of ambush, but the idea that like we start with this person who's a prisoner, and then that's like the initial opening is a kind of fight scene with the main character. I guess the main character, some of the main characters are introduced as like antagonists, I guess, like very initially. I think I kind of wanted to see them through someone else's eyes before you see them through their own eyes.
well, it worked great. I think what made me wonder if it was all like planned beforehand or if you kind of made it up as you went or so was that I saw lots of setups and payoffs, even just in the first chapter. And I was like, oh, this must have been planned. But especially, like, for example, the princess and is it Copper is the human character, the POV character? It's been a couple of months since I've read the book, and I read a lot of books.
Sorry,
But the princess and Copper, were both suffering from the effects of a mutiny. When we first meet them, they're the people under their command have risen up against them. I thought, oh, there we go, right? The A and the B character both have something great in common, that we're going to see conflict on that. And indeed, that's kind of where the story went. But that's what made me wonder, like, how much was planned out beforehand? Given the nature of the competition, did you make up a lot of it as you went, or?
I had like the broad strokes plot planned, and it was like I mean the plot's very very simple, like structurally, and then the actual a lot of the character stuff kind of I made up as I went along, other than like the main beats, and things like the Copper and her both having a mute. That was like sort of accidental initially, and then when I realized I'd done it, I was like, oh, that it's like accidentally a theme, so that should be like more of an important part of it. Was already an important part of her character that was planned, but like the idea that it should be quite relevant to him as well was yeah, kind of a retroactive, like adding a theme.
I'll quite often find that when I'm writing the book, I'll have one idea in my head for what everything is or how the themes all go. But then once I've finished it, I'll read it back and I'll think, oh, there's the theme. That's this should be that way and that should be that way. So it's all cohesive. But yeah, it's great when that happens accidentally and you find it later and go, oh, that's great.
Yeah, that's how I like to write, I guess, because I have tried like super planning things out before, and it kind of kills the story for me a bit. Yeah. I do kind of need that kind of this character is kind of just their own thing now, and
yeah,
I can steer them a little bit, but I'm not gonna like make them act too far out of character, and then they kind of change the plot, and I don't know, just makes the story feel a little bit more interesting for me, because you kind of like discover new things. I guess like you said, like you just kind of go like, oh yeah, cool, that can work that way now. I didn't think about that, but that's nice.
And I agree. I definitely think the characters did stay in character throughout the story. Like we see like the princess really struggling with just a lot of things throughout the story, but then there's very much like that dynamic and the hierarchy, and especially when you throw Copper into the mix. But with the personality that you gave Copper, it was clear and evident that he was going to try to toe that line, and toe that line he did. And like, and I think it's always fun to have a character like that in this otherwise fairly serious story, all things considered, because I think especially like his character arc, because he had because he had that shot at redemption at the end there when, spoilers, sorry guys, we assume if you're watching the interview you've read the book, so
yep.
There is that kind of that end battle with everyone where you have Copper giving a bit of redemption there, where he's actually leading this newfound kind of ragtag crew of villagers to success against what would otherwise be an onslaught.
Yeah. I think, I'm glad you remember that, because yeah, sometimes
there's a bunch of moments that I marked down in my notes file, and I was going to go and read them before today's interview to refresh my memory, but I didn't have to. There's so many moments in the book where I was like, wow, damn, that's really cool. That's really cool. In particular, I know Ryan mentioned the action earlier, but there were so many great fights in the book. But in particular, the one where, what's the older warrior's name? The one that the princess ends up scrapping with?
Nessa.
Nessa was great. But is it Nessa that goes into the den of thieves and stuff, or the gangsters, and she lets herself turn pure white after she's covered in blood so that they can see all the gore that she's covered in?
Yeah, that
and
is,
just man, that was great. Like I could see that so vividly in my head. And just the whole chameleon samurai elf thing that you had going on, it was played up so fantastically. Like you really made use of the abilities that these warriors had in combat, and it was believable. They weren't over the top powerful. They could be brought down easy, as happens in the book. Some of them don't make it to the end, obviously. Yeah. But that made me then want to ask where you got the inspiration for the action scenes. Like when you're visualizing it, if that's how you do it, when you visualize it in your head, what kind of style is it? Like I got like samurai movie kind of vibes. I also got kind of like ultra violence kind of vibes, if you know what I mean. Like what was your main inspiration for the act?
Yeah, I think it was I mean, I do kind of visualize them to answer that question, and I think in my head I guess it depends what kind of mood I'm in, but they generally it's a mixture of like the yeah, like almost deliberately over the top ultra violence that is sort of like a
Yeah.
mix of um there's a mixture of like realism and like okay, maybe that's like a little bit overkill from things like say like Kill Bill or whatever, where
Yeah, Kill Bill. There, that's yeah, I saw a lot of that in it. I could imagine the big sprays of blood like you get in the old Japanese samurai movies and stuff a lot of the time.
yeah, where like it is over the top. But then like you occasionally have like a slightly more bit of realistic gore where like, you know, if someone does get slashed across the torso, you know, their intestines might fall out. That's the thing that
Yeah.
happens. And usually that's sort of sanitized away, but it like kind of I guess drags it. Well, I guess my intent with that was to maybe drag it like a bit more into reality, but
Yeah.
um, I guess it could also just be another type of over the top gore, basically. But I do kind of sometimes visualize them in a more sort of like animated style. Wouldn't
Yeah, I
necessarily
get
say
you.
all anime is animated this way because a lot of Western animation uses it as well. But I think it's called like AB animation, where like
Right.
the starting stance of a fighter is quite exaggerated, and the ending stance of like a blow, but the in between is only like one or two blurry frames. Um,
Uh-huh.
I don't know if that has any impact on the writing at all because you can't really do that in writing, but I guess it's
Well,
in my head
yeah.
that's
What I found reading the action was similar into what you're describing, where it's almost like keyframes, where there's like a moment and then the moment after it and then the moment after it, and in between it's just like style and movement. And I thought it was paced almost kind of like comic book panels, you know, where it's like you've got a transitory sentence where it comes through that someone's moving or doing something, and then there's the result. And I've looked at writing action before, like advice on how to write action, and something that I think you nailed in this was the idea of action, reaction, consequence, and then it almost like repeats that loop. Someone does something that causes someone to do something else, and as a result, things get worse or things get better, and then you just keep doing that. Especially like the ambush scene in the forest where it doesn't go great for the troop, and they lose one of the number. Someone gets injured, you know, when the soldiers from the Empire
yeah.
kind of betray them. And spoilers, sorry, but uh, for like it's going so badly south, things just keep getting worse and worse, and the tension during those moments is incredible. It was a really like every sentence felt like someone was about to die. So I think it definitely pulls over into writing. I think you achieved that. If it's what you set out to do, you done a good job.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. Uh, I don't think it was like deliberately what I was trying to do, but maybe the connection. And you know what? There wasn't like a conscious thought of like this is what I'm trying to achieve, um, this specific thing, but maybe the images in my brain translated into that.
Don't tell anyone that. Just say it was deliberate. Totally deliberate.
Well, I think speaking of images, the whole idea of not shape shifting, but basically color shifting, because that added to all the battle scenes as well, because you had the instances there where the character where the the characters could like flash letters at each other and basically like say like code words to each other in the middle of a battle. Or I believe his name was Nim.
Yeah.
The
Oh yeah.
like because I just these scenes flash in my head of they're in the village and he's basically like not telling a movie, but like he's able to show a story, able to show history on his body. Like his body really is the canvas, and I thought that was just such a unique and such a cool addition. Like, this isn't just something that's used in war. This is something that's used culturally. This is something that's used socially. This is all like, there's so many more layers to it. Even I think it's at the beginning of the story when they first came into the human, like, westernized, or not westernized, but like the Wild West kind of city, and like they're trying to figure out, no, you can't be striped, that's not what humans look like, and like just those little things like that. You're trying to figure out what shades they're meant to be and how they're
Yeah.
meant to look.
Yeah.
I thought it played such, like, I think for me that, like, obviously the action scenes like we're talking about, but the actual like creativity behind the protagonist was super cool. I've never really read anything like that, because like I said, like, it plays so much more than just like, this is just a gear of war. This is so many, like, this is their actual culture, this is their societies based around it.
Cool. Well, yeah, I'm glad you like that, because it's one of my favorite things as well. And I think
Did you
if
put
I had,
you on your
I was gonna say, if I had one, if there's one thing I'd maybe do differently if I was to write it again, it would maybe be go like even further with that. I'm not sure if it would actually work though, because they still mainly talk to each other and just like with their
Yeah.
voices, which is sort of how humans would do it. I was like, okay, well, they have to talk because I can't be bothered to constantly describe like a dialogue with like colors and then whatnot. And also, how would anyone else talk to them? So that but maybe if I was like a bit braver, I'd try that.
There's always like, what would happen if one of them was deaf? That would be the only way they could communicate, or they'd have ASL or something.
Oh yeah.
That's a good point. I'm gonna steal that idea.
Please.
There's a lot of very stealable ideas in this book, man. I made a lot of notes when I was reading it, just like, God damn, that's an excellent idea. And one of them was Nim. Nim, I think Nim was my favorite character, especially given how we meet him and who he becomes. And like, there's a whole story there that we never had to stop the plot to explore. It was all just implied, and you were kind of left to figure a bit out on your own. But did you like, how much time did you spend coming up with all this cultural stuff? Because it's everywhere through the book. And like, how much of it was just kind of, you thought it was a good idea as you were writing and you went, oh, I'm going to put this in? Because it feels like a lot of research went in.
I don't think I didn't really sit down and do it all beforehand. I think originally it was like, okay, they're not, these things aren't going to be human, and something about shadows from the title, and I kind of want them to be sneaky, so I'll give them some sort of ability that makes them sneaky. And I think the first idea was like, maybe they can actually turn into shadows, and I was like, that's too predictable, and also I don't like the physics of that. Like, how do you become some sort of gas? But no, then there was the color changing thing, and then I realized all the other stuff you could do with that, and it all sort of sprang out of that. So it did actually start as like a gear of war, like Ryan was saying. But then I kind of just, most of the time I think like it got like overlaid in like successive drafts, like they were perhaps became more important as I went through revisions and realized like, no, they would actually they don't need to shout in this instance. They can communicate with like their skin. And then once you do that, you go like, oh yeah, that should have been used in like all these situations as well.
Yeah.
A question I thought of maybe like 5 minutes before we got before we all got on this call was just, do you have any history with animals? I didn't know if like growing up you had like a pet chameleon that helped inspire you for this.
No, not well, no, I do have you know, I've always had like dogs and whatnot, and cats, but I've never had a pet chameleon or cuttlefish or octopus or any of the things. But I kind of am interested in that sort of thing. And I am interested in like animal intelligence, I suppose. So things like just casually. No, I mean, I'm not going to say that I'm like, you know, done loads of research on this sort of thing, but like things like crows and octopi and pigs and dogs and rats and all these sorts of things are kind of on my radar. And so I think that's probably why maybe why I made that connection, where I thought like, oh yeah, that's a different type of tool that like this is basically a octopus, cuttlefish, chameleon type power. And I did kind of already know of some of the ways they used their abilities in nature. And then I did like a little bit more research while I was writing this as well.
I think that's the other thing, because I really like the fact that research was put into it, because it does feel like, to an extent, there was a moment where I was like, not there was a moment, like I do wish that this was a real like culture and a real people, but the amount of the amount of justice that you gave it in terms of like in-depth kind of like not just Gears of War and everything like that. I think you did a great job, because there are moments where it's like, this could have been a real thing at one point. Like it's a story that, although very much rooted in fantasy and fiction, it seems like maybe a long time ago, maybe this was running around. I do like how it had the the Wild West twist to it. I do forget his name. They had the kind of fixer of the Lucky brothers, of the Luck brothers, going after them. I do remember, because you played with perspective a little bit, and I do remember how he showed up at one point and then just kind of disappeared for maybe like 150 pages, and then when he popped back up, it was like, ooh, it's all about to go down. So I think that was it all worked out really nicely, honestly. Like, I find that fantasy books tend to be a little bit more slower or medium paced, but I found that this one, like you said, there was the word blade 0.9 times per page. Like, it was hard to put down because there was just so much going on the whole time.
Yeah, I think that's mainly because they're called blade dancers. And
Yeah.
also the swords are called blades. They never use the word sword. That's something I had to actually control out
Nice.
and go through.
Did they never use the word sword?
No, the Caleb characters never say sword. They always say blade.
That feels
This
like
is
one of those things, like they have, like the Kalids have like 600 words for swords or something.
And none of them is sword.
Yeah, not one of them is the word sword.
Oh,
Speaking of swords, I wanted to ask, on a personal note, given the mashup of the Wild West versus samurai kind of thing that was going on in this, do you think cowboys or samurais are cooler?
that's a tough question.
So your reputation's hinging on this, man.
Yeah. I'll probably go well, if you had to compare, I was going to say if you had to compare the real world versions, but then there's horrible things about both of them.
Oh yeah, yeah.
oh yeah, they're both.
I think in terms of, because I mean, I'd say it's more inspired by the media inspired by those things than those things directly.
Yeah.
I think I probably prefer cowboys and like Western movies to
Ooh, bold.
samurai stuff by a small
Of course,
margin.
come the end of the story, it's looking like the Kalids are going to do a bit of both. If there's going to be another book, then we might have swords and guns at the same time, which makes me very excited.
Well, that was the whole thing with Nim. The fact that Nim knew how to use a gun was so against what they were doing. It was so against their culture and everything. But I'm just pulling this up real quick just because I know you have is it a prequel?
Yeah. I do have a prequel out.
So tell us a little. So there's a prequel. Is there a sequel? Is there going to be? Where do these things take us?
Yeah, so the prequel is it started as trying to be a novella, but I failed to make it short enough. So it's sort of like quite a short novel. And that if you've read the book, there's like a particularly important event that you can think would be the obvious thing to write a prequel about, and it's about
Oh
that.
yeah.
I guess I won't spoil
The
it.
exciting incident, one might say. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess it does a bit more world building of places you don't get to see in this book, and explores a bit more backstory, and it might change the way you think about some of the characters.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's pretty. It's in terms of like the amount of time it covers, in like story time, it's only like it all occurs in like less than a day, and it's only from one perspective, so it's slightly different to this story. And then I
Yeah.
was working on a sequel, and I think I started it like before I had a good idea of what the sequel should be, and it kind of didn't work out. I got like 75% of the way through my draft of it, and I was like, this just isn't working. So that's I kind of have restarted that, and it's back at being like an outline. And I'm pretty
Yeah.
happy with the new outline. But I haven't had a chance to start working on it yet because I've made the mistake of starting another project that I thought would be really short, and it's taken ages. So so there will eventually be a sequel, but it might take a little while.
Fair enough. It takes a lot of courage to walk away from a project like that and just scrap it and start over. I've done the same thing numerous times though. Like I read a book recently, like an advanced review copy from one of my favorite writers. And the first book was one of my favorite books of last year, and the sequel was just. And when I said to him afterwards, I was like, "It doesn't feel as good as the first one." He said, "Yeah, I know. It felt really terrible to write. Like I didn't enjoy writing it."
Yeah.
I think if you get to that point, if you're not enjoying it yourself, that's your mind's trying to tell you something.
Yeah. Yeah, it took me a while to figure out what was happening, but I was like, oh, I don't seem to be writing as much anymore. And then as soon as I mentally like made the decision to kill that story and start over, I suddenly got all my motivation back, and I was like, oh, okay, that's what it
Yeah.
was. Like I didn't and it was just a case of like kind of I suppose writing what I didn't pay enough attention to writing something that I would want to write. I kind of just wrote like logically what would happen next. Didn't really think about like, oh, you could actually just fast forward over. You can pull a Star Wars, and you can have the next one be like several years later, and the situation's completely different now.
Yeah.
But like a lot of stuff's carried over, and that's
Well, I
more
feel
what
like
I'm gonna try and do.
especially with the prequel, like you said, there's a lot of world building there. You've already built this really, really cool world and this really cool species and culture and everything. Like, yeah, I guess that's the cool thing with writing is that you can really make it whatever you want. Like, you could start a whole new story with completely different characters, completely different everything, but just in this own world that you've built yourself, which in itself is awesome. And who knows, maybe you have to do one of those random cover generators again. Get something completely different.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I could try.
So I want to ask one last question since we're running out of time. I can see the little timer on the Zoom thing here. How did you come up with the name Drabs as like a derogatory term for humans? Because I thought that was great, and I had this mental image of you sitting at a thesaurus for hours, being like words for boring, words for try to come up with something. But how did that come about?
I honestly have no idea. I don't think it was a long process. If either it was the first thing that popped into my head, or it was the first way I described Copper from Selene's POV, and then was like, oh, and just put like a capital D at the front of it.
That feels like a slur.
It does.
Yeah.
It does feel like
Or yeah, or maybe I did just be like synonyms for colorless or something.
Yeah.
into Google.
No, I thought that was great. I love the like the fact that you can have a make-believe culture so realistic as to include things like the horrible names they call other people without even thinking about it. It's just like Ryan said, the world building was incredible, but I've read books with great world building that don't have great stories. This had a great story, and I've read books with great world building and great stories that didn't have any good action or anything, like the action was all muddled, and this had some of the best action I've ever read. So ding, 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 all round fantastic.
Like, hats off.
Is there anywhere that we can find you online? How would people go about finding you, Jennings, if they want to read your book?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on Twitter and Instagram as Zabrinsky, which hopefully you can see my name on screen, so you should know how to spell it. And I do have a website that's jzabrinsky.co.uk. I'm not like the most active social butterfly, but if I am gonna put out a new book, you can know about it from one of those things.
And we can definitely put those links in the description and everything, so everyone watching who wants to get to know more and everything can contact you directly or check out your website.
Oh, cool. And if anyone watching this has read the book, if you subscribe to my newsletter, you get the prequel for free. So
there we go. We could probably put a link to that as well.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, we could throw in links everywhere.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, listen, man, we're at 1:30, so it's been a pleasure to speak to you. It's great to find out all these little things about the book.
Yeah, likewise. It's been great.
Yeah, really, thank you again for participating. Thank you again for your time. Thank you again for, I know we're kind of new what we're doing and everything, so thank you again for being a part of it. It really does mean a lot, and I think the whole with what we're doing is to just get more insight and get more exposure onto books like this that otherwise go under the radar. And yeah, so thank you. It's people like you to help make it possible.
Oh well, thank you. I think it's a great kind of mission to have given yourselves. So,
but we'll get everything sorted out, and we look forward to the sequel or the trilogy or whatever you end up deciding to do. But thank you again. And for those of you that forget, it's Troupe of Shadows by Jennings Zabrinsky. Check it out. It's lovely. But
it's stunning.
Take care, everybody, and have a great rest of the day. Thank you again.
All right.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye, man.